Have you ever noticed that the person in your life who seems the most confident, the most dominant, the most unshakable, is also the person who falls apart the fastest when things don't go their way? That's not a coincidence. What if I told you that the narcissist in your life is probably suffering more deeply than you could ever imagine? Not the kind of suffering you'd recognize, but a kind that's so painful they've built an entire personality to hide it. And here's the shocking part. Understanding this doesn't mean you have to tolerate their behavior. In fact, it might be the key to finally freeing yourself from their emotional grip. So stay with me as we uncover 5 unmissable signs that the narcissist you know is deeply, profoundly struggling on the inside. Make sure to subscribe to the channel because here you'll discover powerful psychological truths that can change your life. The insights we're about to share aren't just theory. They're based on years of psychological research and the real experiences of people just like you who've had to navigate relationships with narcissists. When you subscribe, you'll get access to content that helps you understand the hidden dynamics of toxic relationships, protect your mental health, and reclaim your emotional power. Let's dive in. Now, before we go any deeper, I want you to think about something. When you picture a narcissist, what do you see? You probably see someone who walks into a room like they own it, someone who never seems to doubt themselves, someone who always has a comeback, always has an excuse, always seems to be winning. They appear unaffected by criticism. They seem immune to shame. They rarely, if ever, apologize. On the surface, they look invincible. But here's what most people don't realize. That invincible exterior is actually a carefully constructed defense mechanism. It's a mask. And behind that mask is often a person who is drowning in emotional pain, terrified of being found out, and desperately searching for something that will finally make them feel whole. They just don't know how to ask for help. So instead, they demand it. They extract it. They manipulate for it. The narcissist's behavior isn't random cruelty for the sake of cruelty, though it can certainly feel that way to you. It's a survival strategy. It's what they learned works when you're terrified of being exposed as fundamentally flawed. And while this doesn't excuse their actions, understanding it can actually be liberating for you. Because once you see the suffering underneath the narcissism, you stop taking their behavior so personally. You stop wondering what you did wrong. You start to see them as a person trapped in their own psychological prison. And that's when you find the strength to walk away. If you've ever been confused by someone who acts strong but feels emotionally unstable, who seems invincible one moment and fragile the next, make sure to subscribe right now. Because we're about to break down the psychology of what's really happening behind closed doors, and it will change how you understand every interaction you've had with this person. Let's start with the first and most obvious sign: their constant, never-ending need for validation that somehow never feels like enough. Think about this scenario for a moment. You're with someone who accomplishes something genuinely impressive. They get a promotion, they succeed at something difficult, they receive a compliment. A normal person might feel satisfied for a while. They might bask in that success for a few days or even weeks. But the narcissist? They need you to acknowledge it immediately. They need everyone to know about it. They bring it up constantly. They fish for more compliments. They compare themselves to others to highlight how they're better. And here's the thing that drives people crazy. No amount of validation is ever enough. You can tell them they're amazing, and within hours they're searching for the next hit of external approval. It's like watching someone drink water when they're dying of thirst, except the water never quenches their thirst. It actually makes it worse. Why does this happen? Because deep down, the narcissist doesn't believe the compliment. They don't believe they're actually as good as they're pretending to be. Their sense of self-worth is entirely external. It's not built on genuine self-esteem or real accomplishments that feel meaningful to them. Instead, it's built on how others perceive them. So they're constantly chasing that external validation because they're terrified that without it, they'll be revealed as ordinary, mediocre, flawed. The validation is like a drug, and they're an addict, except the drug never gives them the high they're chasing. It just keeps them perpetually anxious, perpetually hungry, perpetually desperate. This brings us to the second sign: emotional emptiness and a profound lack of real fulfillment, no matter what they achieve. You know that feeling you get when you accomplish something you've been working toward? There's a sense of satisfaction, maybe even joy. You feel like something inside you has been fulfilled. The narcissist experiences this differently, if at all. They might get a brief rush of superiority when they one-up someone, but it's hollow, it's empty. They acquire the things they think will make them happy: the perfect house, the perfect partner, the perfect career, and yet they feel nothing. They feel empty. That emptiness is terrifying to them, so they keep accumulating, keep achieving, keep constructing a life that looks perfect from the outside while feeling completely devoid of meaning on the inside. This is suffering in a form that most people don't recognize. We think of suffering as sadness or grief or depression, but there's a kind of suffering that comes from going through life feeling nothing real, from succeeding at everything and still feeling like a failure, from having everything and feeling like you have nothing. The narcissist is running on a treadmill that never stops, always reaching for the next thing, always convinced that the next accomplishment, the next relationship, the next validation will finally fill the void. But it never does, and they know it never will. On some level, they know that the life they're living is a performance, not a reality, and that knowledge is slowly suffocating them. Now let's talk about the third sign, and this one is particularly revealing: their extreme, disproportionate reactions to even minor criticism or rejection. Have you ever said something to a narcissist that was meant as constructive feedback or just a casual observation, and they absolutely lost it? You thought you said something small, something reasonable, and suddenly they're raging or they're devaluing you or they're giving you the silent treatment for days. It seems insane. It seems like an overreaction, but it's actually a window into their inner world. Because criticism doesn't just sting for a narcissist, it shatters them. It hits the exact wound they've been hiding from everyone, including themselves. Think about it like this. A normal person has a self-esteem that's relatively stable. They know they have strengths and weaknesses. They can hear criticism and think, okay, that's one area I could work on, but I'm still a good person overall. A narcissist doesn't have that. Their self-worth is like a house of cards. It's fragile and tall and it looks impressive, but it's balanced on a foundation of nothing. So when you criticize them, you're not just pointing out a flaw. You're threatening the entire structure of their identity. You're suggesting that the facade might not be real, that they might be ordinary after all, that they might be flawed, and the panic that creates is enormous. So they lash out, they rage, they punish you for making them feel that way. They devalue you so they can feel superior again. They gaslight you about what you said, anything to make that terrifying feeling go away. This is a sign of deep suffering because it reveals how fragile their psychological defense system actually is. They're living in constant fear of exposure, constant fear that someone will see through the mask and discover that underneath it all, they're not the superior being they claim to be. They're just a person, a flawed, scared, wounded person. And they can't handle that, so they punish anyone who threatens that illusion. The fourth sign is something that becomes apparent over time: their inability to maintain genuine, stable, long-term relationships despite their constant need for connection. This is particularly painful to watch unfold. The narcissist enters relationships with intensity. They love bomb you. You feel like you've finally met someone who truly sees you, who gets you, who wants to be with you completely. It's intoxicating. And then, gradually or sometimes suddenly, they lose interest. They become critical. They become distant. They move on to someone new who can give them that fresh supply of admiration and validation. Or they pull you back in with promises of change and you give it another try only for the cycle to repeat. From their perspective, they're not trying to hurt people. They're actually running from intimacy. Here's why. Real intimacy requires vulnerability. It requires letting someone see you as you actually are, not as you want to be perceived. And that's something a narcissist cannot do. Because if they're truly vulnerable with someone, if that person actually gets to know them, they might discover the truth about who they really are underneath the mask. So the narcissist sabotages relationships. They create drama. They find reasons to leave or to push the other person away, because staying in a relationship where someone might see their true self is more painful than being alone. Except they can't stand being alone either, because alone is when the emptiness becomes unavoidable. So they're trapped in a cycle. They pursue connection desperately, but they sabotage it the moment it becomes real. This is profound suffering. Imagine being a person who needs connection so badly that you'll manipulate and deceive to get it, but the moment you get it, you have to destroy it, because real connection means being known, and being known means being potentially rejected for who you actually are. That's a special kind of hell, and the narcissist lives in it every single day. The fifth and final sign is perhaps the most revealing: cycles of grandiosity, followed by sudden collapses into insecurity, shame, and sometimes even depression. You've probably witnessed this. The narcissist is riding high, feeling invincible, acting like they're the best at everything and everyone should bow down to them. They're aggressive, they're dominant, they're expansive. And then something happens. They make a mistake, they fail at something, someone challenges them, someone leaves them, and they crash. And when they crash hard. They might withdraw completely. They might become uncharacteristically quiet or sad. They might confess vulnerabilities or insecurities. They might seem depressed. And if you try to help them or point out that their initial grandiose belief wasn't accurate, they lash out, or they push you away, or they go silent. These cycles reveal that the grandiosity isn't actually a stable part of their personality. It's a defense against a deeper truth about how they actually see themselves. When the defense is up, they're untouchable. When it cracks, even slightly, all of the self-doubt and shame underneath it comes flooding in, and they can't tolerate it, so they either reconstruct the grandiose narrative or they collapse entirely. Neither state is sustainable. Neither state is actually them. They're living in a psychological seesaw between two extremes, and both extremes are exhausting. If you want to understand these behaviors and protect your emotional well-being from being drained by someone else's psychological patterns, subscribe to the channel. Because the more you understand what's really driving narcissistic behavior, the easier it becomes to set healthy boundaries, to stop internalizing their criticism, and to stop believing that you're responsible for making them feel better. That understanding is power. That understanding is freedom. Now, I want you to really sit with something here. Everything we've talked about, the constant need for validation, the emptiness despite success, the extreme reactions to criticism, the sabotaged relationships, the cycles between grandiosity and collapse. All of this points to one central truth. There is an enormous gap between who the narcissist appears to be and who they actually are. The person everyone sees is competent, confident, successful, charming, and untouchable. The person they are when they're alone, or with someone they've pushed away, or after they've failed at something, that person is scared. That person is uncertain. That person is desperate. That person is suffering. But here's what's crucial to understand. Their suffering does not justify how they treat you. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to accept the hurt. Knowing that a narcissist is deeply wounded doesn't obligate you to stay in a relationship with them or to sacrifice your own mental health trying to help them. In fact, that's one of the biggest mistakes people make. They learn about the pain underneath the narcissism, they feel compassion, and they decide that they can heal the narcissist if they just love them hard enough, if they just prove their loyalty, if they just show them that they're a good person. This is a trap. This is how you lose yourself, because the narcissist's suffering is not your responsibility to fix. They are responsible for their own healing, their own growth, their own journey to mental health. You are responsible for your own well-being, your own boundaries, your own emotional safety. And sometimes, protecting your own emotional safety means walking away from someone, no matter how much they're suffering. In fact, sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is to walk away, because staying in the relationship only enables their dysfunction and continues to damage you. So here's what happens when you truly understand this. You start to see situations differently. When the narcissist rages at you, instead of feeling attacked, you start to see someone in panic. When they devalue you, instead of believing it, you recognize it as a defense mechanism they're deploying because you made them feel vulnerable. When they hurt you, instead of wondering what you did wrong, you understand that their behavior is about their own internal struggle, not about your actual worth. This shift in perspective is powerful. It's liberating. It removes the narcissist from the pedestal you may have put them on, and it puts you back in control of your own narrative. But there's more. Understanding their suffering also helps you recognize patterns in your own thinking that keep you stuck. If you're drawn to narcissists, if you keep finding yourself in relationships with emotionally unavailable, manipulative, or grandiose people, there's usually something in your own psychology that's creating that attraction. Maybe you were raised by a narcissistic parent, and you're unconsciously trying to earn the approval of a narcissist in your adult relationships, hoping that this time will be different. Maybe you have a rescuer complex, and you're drawn to people who seem broken or who need you to fix them. Maybe you've been taught that love means sacrificing yourself for someone else. Whatever it is, understanding narcissism helps you understand yourself better. It helps you see your own patterns. And once you see your patterns, you can change them. This is where your real power lies. Not in understanding the narcissist better, but in understanding yourself better through the lens of your relationship with them. The narcissist is a teacher, even though that's not their intention. They're teaching you about your own boundaries, your own worth, your own capacity to stay true to yourself, even when someone is trying to rewrite reality. They're teaching you about the difference between love and manipulation, between genuine connection and performance. And once you learn those lessons, you don't need to stay in the relationship anymore. In fact, staying would mean you haven't actually learned the lesson yet. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you're finally at the point where you understand what's been happening. You've seen the patterns, you've recognized the signs of their suffering. You've started to connect the dots between their behavior and their internal struggle. And then something shifts inside you. You realize that you cannot fix this person. You realize that no amount of love, loyalty, or effort on your part will change their fundamental relationship with themselves and the world. You realize that by staying, you're not helping them. You're actually hurting yourself and, paradoxically, enabling them to continue their destructive patterns. And in that realization comes a kind of grief. Because maybe you had hoped that if you just understood them enough, loved them enough, proved your worth enough, they would finally see you. They would finally value you. They would finally treat you with the respect and kindness you deserve. But that hope was based on a misunderstanding. The narcissist isn't incapable of seeing your worth because they're broken. They're incapable of genuinely seeing your worth because real, genuine appreciation would require them to be vulnerable. It would require them to acknowledge that someone else has value, independent of what they can extract from them, and that's something they cannot do. So the grief you feel isn't really about losing them. It's about losing the fantasy. It's about accepting that the relationship you thought you had or could have isn't real. It's about mourning the time and energy you invested in trying to be enough for someone who will never let themselves be satisfied by anyone or anything. And that's painful. That's genuinely painful. But on the other side of that pain is something crucial: freedom. On the other side of that pain is the freedom to stop performing, to stop managing someone else's emotions, to stop trying to be perfect or to walk on eggshells or to accept blame for things that aren't your fault, to start building a life that's actually based on reality, not on someone else's distorted perception of you. Here's the truth that changes everything. Their struggle is internal, and you are not responsible for fixing it. Say that to yourself right now. Your responsibility is to your own emotional health. Your responsibility is to your own healing. Your responsibility is to build a life that feels meaningful to you, not to serve as an emotional support system for someone who will never truly appreciate what you're giving them. And this is where real power comes in. Real power isn't about being more confident than the narcissist or more successful or more attractive or smarter. Real power comes from awareness. It comes from knowing yourself. It comes from understanding your own patterns and your own wounds and choosing to heal them instead of repeating them. Real power comes from setting boundaries that protect your emotional well-being, even when the narcissist tries to convince you that those boundaries are selfish or cruel or unloving. Real power comes from being able to hear criticism and accusations and devaluation from the narcissist and knowing that none of it is actually about you. The narcissist's emotional cycles, they have nothing to do with you. Their validation needs, not your job to meet them. Their rage when you set a boundary, their emotional emergency, not yours. Their threats to leave or to destroy you if you don't do what they want. A manipulation tactic that works only if you believe you're responsible for preventing it. Once you understand that their emotional state is their responsibility, not yours, you start to breathe easier. You start to reclaim the energy you've been spending trying to manage their feelings. You start to invest that energy in yourself. And here's what happens when you do that consistently. When you refuse to get pulled into their emotional cycles, when you maintain your boundaries even when they test them with rage or tears or promises or threats, they start to fall away from your life. Sometimes they leave because they realize you won't give them the reactions they need anymore. Sometimes you leave because you finally have enough clarity to see that staying is hurting you. Either way, the relationship ends. And when it does, you discover something remarkable. You're still okay. You're actually more than okay. You're relieved. You're lighter. You're free. Because here's what the narcissist doesn't understand, and it's the most important thing. You cannot be destroyed by their judgment. You cannot be diminished by their criticism. You cannot be abandoned in any way that matters because you already have what they're desperately searching for. You have yourself. You have access to your own internal sense of worth. You don't need them to tell you that you're valuable. You don't need their approval to make decisions. You don't need their validation to feel complete. That makes you powerful in a way they will never understand. The narcissist is out there chasing validation from the world, terrified that if everyone stops applauding, they'll discover they're nothing. You get to walk away from that game entirely. You get to build your self-worth on something real, on your values, your actions, your genuine accomplishments, your relationships with people who actually care about you. You get to define yourself instead of being defined by someone else's distorted perception of you. That's freedom. That's real power. So as you move forward, remember this. Understanding narcissism isn't about becoming bitter or cynical. It's about becoming clear. It's about recognizing manipulation when you see it. It's about protecting your own emotional energy. It's about choosing yourself. And choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's actually the most loving thing you can do because you cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot help anyone if you're drowning. If you want clarity, self-respect, and emotional freedom in your life, subscribe now to this channel. Because we're committed to helping you understand the hidden dynamics that have been keeping you stuck, and we're committed to empowering you to build a life based on your own values and your own truth, not on someone else's lies. Subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to hear this. Maybe it's a friend who's been confused by a narcissist in their life. Maybe it's a family member who's been wondering why they keep getting hurt by the same type of person. Maybe it's someone who's still in the middle of a narcissistic relationship and needs to hear that there's a path out and there's hope on the other side. Share this because understanding these patterns is how we collectively break free from the cycle of narcissistic abuse. I'll see you in the next video.